There are names that, once spoken, cause history itself to bow its head. Kings, empires, figures who once made the earth tremble and filled the skies with smoke and fire. Yet there is another name, one not tied to a throne, not accompanied by victory, not surrounded by armies or miracles. A name that appears in the Qur'an so quietly that unless you slow down and linger, you might pass right over it without realizing something extraordinary is unfolding. That name is Luqman. He was not a prophet, not a messenger. He carried no revelation. He did not lead a nation. He did not found a political or military era. And yet Allah chose to name an entire surah after him, an honor most of humanity has never dared to imagine. That question hangs suspended in history like a silent crack in how we understand human worth. Why? And before hearing any details about Luqman's life, before mentioning the timeless advice he gave his son, we must pause at this most unsettling moment. The Qur'an records the names of prophets, angels, and nations that defied Allah and were wiped from the face of the earth. Yet among all those names tied to power and upheaval, there is one ordinary man presented as a moral standard for all humanity. Not because he was chosen as a messenger, but because he was granted something even more elusive than miracles: wisdom born from a purified heart. What is Allah telling us here? That not all greatness needs noise, that there are people who never step onto the stage of history amid applause, yet their names are engraved deeper than any monument. And what makes this story unsettling is not Luqman himself, but the question it forces each of us to face. If Allah does not measure human worth by status, fame, or outward influence, then what is He looking at? The world we live in closely resembles the world Luqman once walked through. A world where value is decided by what can be seen: wealth, appearance, followers, power, a loud voice. Those who are noticed are considered important. Those who are ignored are considered insignificant. But the Qur'an, beginning with Surah Luqman, quietly overturns that entire system of measurement. It places a man with no visible advantage into a position history cannot erase, simply to tell humanity that there are things you cannot see, but Allah can. This is not a story meant to be admired from a distance. It is a mirror placed directly in front of us. Because if Luqman was recorded not for power, and then what was it within him that caused Allah to see him among millions of others? And more unsettling still, if Allah saw him, then He is also seeing us in the same way. Not when we are praised, not when we stand in high positions, but in moments when no one is watching, when we are silent, when we are dismissed, when the heart must choose between resentment and purification. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we do not simply retell stories of the past, but uncover the questions the past is still whispering to the present. And today's story does not begin with a conquest, but with a mystery named Luqman. A man remembered not for what he possessed, but for what he became in the sight of Allah. If you believe only those with prominent roles are seen, if you have ever thought that silence equals obscurity, then this story will force you to reconsider everything. Because when Allah loves a person, He does not carve their name into stone. He writes them into revelation. And that is when history is compelled to listen. If you want to follow the full journey of a man ignored by the world, but immortalized by Allah, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us and give us the motivation to continue bringing you the deepest, most honest, and most moving stories from sacred history. This story has only just begun, and what makes it unforgettable still lies ahead. Luqman did not enter life under anyone's expectant gaze. No eyes followed him with questions about his future. No hand rested on his shoulder with hope or blessing. From his earliest days, he existed within a class society had learned not to see. Not because they disappeared, but because others had learned to look straight through them. as if their presence carried no meaning worth noticing. That world operated on cold measurements. Human value was weighed by what could be seen and easily compared: appearance, lineage, power, loud confidence. Luqman possessed none of these. He had no family name to protect him, no wealth to earn respect, no voice strong enough to force others to listen. In the eyes of society, he was a man who offered no benefit, posed no threat, and required no attention. Someone who could pass by without leaving a trace in anyone's memory. His appearance only reinforced that judgment. Short in stature, dark-skinned, thick-lipped, feet cracked from long days of labor beneath a burning sun. Nothing about him suggested nobility by human standards. He did not look like someone born to lead, and he looked like someone born to serve. And in that contrast lay a bitter truth. The world does not only rank people by their actions, but by the bodies they never chose. In crowded marketplaces, Luqman blended into the mass of laborers, those who bent their backs to secure food for the next day. No one offered him a place of honor. No one asked for his opinion when decisions were made. He was present, but his presence did not count. This was not open cruelty, but a quieter form of erasure, where a human being is reduced to a tool rather than a soul worth hearing. Then chains entered his life, not as a sudden shock, but as the next expected step of a fate already dismissed. When he was sold like property, Luqman did not merely lose physical freedom. Society confirmed what it had long implied: he did not belong to himself. His words carried no weight. His thoughts held no value. He existed to obey, not to think. Yet it was at this lowest point that something entirely different began to unfold. While society saw only the limits of his body, Luqman began to discover the vastness within. Forced into silence, he learned to listen. Placed at the lowest position, he gained a vantage point unavailable to those who stood above. He saw how power behaves when unchecked. He saw how small, loud people become when no one is left to dominate. And he noticed a repeating truth. Many who are respected outwardly are hollow within. Luqman did not resent his fate, not because he felt no pain, but because he understood that resentment would only bind him tighter. He chose to keep his heart untainted by the injustice he endured. This was not weak submission, and it was a quiet form of strength, the refusal to let circumstance define one's essence. While others use speech to assert themselves, Luqman learned to guard words as something rare and dangerous. He realized some words can destroy an entire life, and some silences can protect a soul from decay. He understood that not every argument is a victory, and not every restraint is defeat. Some battles can only be won by refusing to fight them. What makes this story remarkable is not that Luqman was underestimated. History is filled with people who were crushed. What makes it different is how he lived within that dismissal without losing himself. He did not let a low status become a measure of inner worth. He did not allow others' contempt to become the way he viewed himself. Here, a crucial boundary is drawn. Some are lowered by the world and come to believe they truly are lesser. Others are lowered by the world yet keep their hearts upright. Luqman belonged to the second group. That is what transformed his invisibility before people into a powerful presence before Allah. When the world could not see him, Allah saw him clearly. This chapter of Luqman's life was not recorded through major events. There were no memorable dates, no victories to recount. Yet it became the foundation for everything that followed. Without years of being misjudged, there would not have been a soul deep enough to recognize true value. And without being considered insignificant, Luqman would not have become living proof of a truth that silences the world. Human worth does not lie in where one stands in the eyes of others, but in where one keeps the heart when no one stands beside them. There is a kind of wisdom not born in classrooms or loud debates. It forms in extended stretches of quiet, where a person is forced to remain with themselves longer than they wish. Luqman entered that journey not by choice but by circumstance. When his words were not sought, when his reactions changed nothing, silence became the only space where he could exist without losing himself. And within that space, a slow but profound process began. For many, silence is emptiness. For Luqman, it became a tool. He used silence to hear what others accidentally revealed when they believed no one important was listening. He heard fear beneath aggression, weakness behind confidence, and emptiness beneath boasting. Placed low, and he gained an advantage unavailable to those above. He saw people when they did not feel the need to perform. Endurance for Luqman was not about being crushed. It was the art of keeping the inner self from being distorted by external pressure. Each day of hardship sharpened his sensitivity rather than dulling it. He learned to distinguish between pain that matures a person and pain that poisons them. And he chose the harder path, refusing to let suffering become his identity. Observation completed the equation. Luqman did not observe to judge, but to understand. He recognized that much cruelty comes not from strength, but from insecurity. That those who command the most are often the most afraid of losing control. And that words, when unrestrained, can wound more deeply than actions. These insights did not harden into dry theory, and they settled into a flexible, living understanding, deep enough to need no proof. While many believe wisdom must be displayed, Luqman learned the opposite. True wisdom often waits. It appears only when necessary. He did not speak to be heard. He spoke when words could land exactly where they belonged, and so he avoided meaningless struggles. He understood that some conversations only drain the soul, and some questions deserve only action or silence. Over time, Luqman's silence was no longer a sign of oppression. It became a choice. He chose not to react to every provocation. He chose not to let fleeting emotions control speech. He chose to keep his heart from rushing to conclusions about others, even when others were quick to judge him. This choice did not isolate him. It grounded him. A heart not pulled by every insult is difficult to manipulate. Here, wisdom began to take visible form, not as a title, but as a way of being. Luqman did not need to prove his insight. His presence spoke for him. His calm was not indifference. It was the result of having seen enough not to be dazzled by surfaces. He understood that human life moves in repeating patterns, and those who recognize them early are not swept away by every small disturbance. Most importantly, this wisdom did not separate him from people. It brought him closer. Understanding human fragility removed any need to diminish others to elevate himself. He did not wield knowledge as a weapon. He used it as a filter, allowing him to respond with clarity rather than impulse. Allah granted Luqman hikmah not because he spoke many correct things, but because he lived long enough in awareness to avoid speaking what was wrong. That wisdom was not loud. It did not impose. It flowed quietly, shaping decisions without display. Born from silence, it did not fear silence. Forged through endurance, it did not break under pressure. This phase of Luqman's life reveals a truth few wish to accept. Not all growth comes from bold action. Some transformations only occur when a person dares to remain with themselves long enough. When no one listens, no one affirms, no one validates worth from the outside. Only then can true value form. If Luqman later spoke words that reshaped how people viewed morality, it was not coincidence. It was the result of a long process where each silent day stacked like invisible stones, forming a foundation strong enough to carry wisdom. And that wisdom did not arrive to impress. It arrived to stand firm. And that is why, when the moment came, a single sentence from Luqman could slow an entire room. There are moments in life that do not require miracles to change destiny. They arrive so quietly that Without awareness, one might pass right through them. For Luqman, that moment did not happen before a crowd. It had no witnesses, it was not recorded by date. It came through a simple command that seemed insignificant. Yet in that moment, everything was decided. When Luqman was asked to choose the best and the worst parts of an animal, the test was not about skill or obedience. It aimed directly at how he understood human nature and himself. A shallow answer would have sufficed, but Luqman did not answer to finish the task. But he answered with what had accumulated through years of silence, endurance, and observation. The heart and the tongue. Two small parts lacking physical power, incapable of instilling fear. Yet in Luqman's understanding, they were the source of all good and evil. He did not speak as a philosopher lecturing, but as someone who had witnessed too many lives undone by intention and speech. He knew a pure heart can carry a person, while a corrupted one can collapse everything, no matter how strong the surface appears. In that moment, Luqman did not try to appear clever. He did not seek approval. He spoke truth as it was, and that truth caused the space around him to pause. This was not an answer that could be memorized. It was the conclusion of a life filtered through hardship. And those who have known contempt understand the destructive force of words. Those who have lived in silence understand the value of a word spoken at the right time. What made this moment decisive was not recognition from others. It was that Luqman was internally prepared. When a person understands what truly corrodes the self, they are no longer easily controlled by circumstance. Luqman's freedom did not begin when chains were removed. It began long before, when he refused to let resentment deform his heart and refused to let his tongue become an instrument of bitterness. Here, a profound principle emerges. People often think oppression comes from outside. Luqman shows that the most dangerous form of slavery begins within. A heart filled with resentment and a tongue left unchecked can turn a free person into a prisoner. Conversely, a guarded heart and measured speech can keep someone steady even when everything else is taken away. When that truth was spoken, what changed was not merely how others saw Luqman. The world was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Power does not lie in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Not everyone bound is weak, and not everyone who commands is strong. This moment inverted the logic the world takes for granted. Afterward, Luqman did not step forward as a victor. He did not celebrate recognition. For him, what mattered had already been settled. His heart was in its proper place. His tongue had been guarded long enough not to betray his inner state. What followed was simply consequence. When someone lives long enough in truth, truth eventually clears its own path. And this also explains why Luqman's wisdom never imposed itself. It did not command or threaten. It reached people at a deeper level, forcing each person to question their own heart and speech. No one can escape those two companions. They follow us everywhere, whether honored or despised, among crowds or alone in the dark. If the silent years were accumulation, this was crystallization. Quiet, brief, yet decisive. Luqman did not need to prove himself worthy of freedom. He only needed to remain who he already was. And that is what lifted his story beyond personal circumstance into a universal lesson about how people build or destroy themselves daily, not through grand decisions, but through how they guard their hearts and what they allow their tongues to release. Here, Luqman's path turned, not because the world changed, but because he was ready to step into a role Allah had long prepared. The role of a man without revelation, yet entrusted with a truth deep enough to illuminate generations. Some people leave the world with visible traces, temples, fortresses, tombs, names carved in stone to resist forgetting. Luqman departed in a different way. No place is confirmed as his final resting point. No marker stands for people to say, "Here greatness lies." and that absence itself becomes the strongest affirmation of his legacy. Luqman never lived to be found. He lived to keep his heart correctly positioned before Allah. When someone lives this way, where they are buried no longer matters. What matters is what they sowed while they breathed. For Luqman, that legacy lies not in wealth or power, but in words spoken one quiet afternoon, in when the light softened and the world grew still enough to listen. When Luqman called his son to him, he did not stand as a master. He sat as a father, aware that time was no longer his. His words were not meant to impress. They were things that needed to be handed down before it was too late. He began at the deepest root of human life, the purity of belief, knowing that when the center is misplaced, everything else drifts, no matter how beautiful it appears. He spoke of Allah not as a distant concept, but as a presence that sees even when no one else does. He understood that awareness is what keeps people upright when external supervision disappears. He spoke of gratitude not as a ritual, but as an inner foundation. A heart without gratitude lives in constant scarcity, even when it holds the world. When he mentioned parents, in his voice carried the weight of experience. He did not list duties. He recalled unseen sacrifices, years of quiet erosion rarely acknowledged. He knew true respect is not loud, but gentle, even when one feels misunderstood. Then he led his son to a realization that reshapes life entirely. Nothing, no matter how small, escapes Allah's awareness. From there, every action gained weight, every choice mattered. He urged his son to hold on to prayer not as a burden, but as a tether keeping the heart from drifting. He knew life would test people with exhaustion, doubt, and disappointment. Only those who regularly return to Allah remain intact amid those waves. He did not hide that the right path is difficult. When advising his son to call toward good and resist wrong, he made no promises of support. He spoke of pain, misunderstanding, even loneliness that often accompanies standing for truth. That is why he placed patience immediately after, not to justify suffering, but to prevent pain from corrupting the heart. His final teachings were not about grand matters, they were about how one walks, how one speaks, how one exists among others. Do not walk arrogantly as if the earth was made for you alone. Do not raise your voice to force attention. Luqman knew character reveals itself most clearly in small details where no applause exists. That is where humility is tested and sincerity revealed. Afterward, Luqman continued living as he always had. His tone unchanged, his posture steady. Even when people sought him out, even when they asked for counsel, he preserved necessary silence. He remembered days of being dismissed, not to nurture bitterness, but to prevent arrogance from entering when respect arrived. For him, every compliment carried responsibility. Knowing what is given can also be taken if the heart loses direction. When Luqman left this world, he left no location to argue over. Perhaps that was Allah's final protection for him. Had a grave been known, people might have turned it into a destination and forgotten the lesson. With no place to stand, humanity is forced to return to what remains: character and words. Luqman's story ends without closing. It lives whenever someone keeps their heart pure amid noise, whenever someone lowers their voice instead of elevating ego, whenever an unseen person lives upright without seeking attention. That is a legacy time cannot erase. Allah does not preserve what is built from stone, but what is built within hearts. And Luqman, who left no footprint on history's map, left an indelible mark on the map of hearts, seeking to stand upright before Allah. The deepest lesson of Luqman is not the advice he gave his son, but the life he lived before speaking it. A life that refused to let hardship define character. A life that denied resentment space to grow. A life that understood mastering the heart and tongue matters more than mastering circumstance. Such a person may be ignored by the world but is never forgotten by Allah. In modern life, where recognition is constantly pursued, this story offers a clear application. When you are unseen, ask what you are guarding within. When underestimated, observe how your heart responds. When you have a chance to speak, consider whether your words heal or harm. And when you feel too small to matter, remember that Allah does not require noise to write lasting legacies. Living by Luqman's spirit does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means walking through it with an inner self the world cannot shape. Doing what is right without praise. Keeping the voice low when ego demands height. Being patient with what cannot be changed and honest with what is your responsibility. It is not an easy path, but it leads to a peace no power can grant. If something in this story resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in Luqman's quiet spaces, join the Prophetic History Explained community. Here, we explore history not merely to know it, but to live by it, reflecting on ourselves through examples Allah chose to preserve in Revelation. You will find deeper analyses of figures, events, and lessons that can be applied directly to modern life. And if you wish to continue this journey with us, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support our mission of delivering meaningful, honest, and moving content. Each subscription is not only support for the channel, but a statement that quiet values still have a place in a world that has grown too loud.